The morning unfolded exactly as Rick had anticipated. Rising early, he stretched in the stillness of their bedroom, taking a quiet moment to admire Sandra sleeping beside him. Her auburn hair spilled across the pillow in soft waves, and her breaths were calm and steady. A gentle smile played on his lips as memories of the confident, vivacious woman he had fallen in love with during their university days came rushing back. She had been bold, brilliant, and fiercely independent, qualities that still captivated him. Careful not to disturb her, he slipped out of bed and began his day in the serene hush of the house. Rick had cleared his schedule, taking a rare day off from work to ensure everything was perfect. 22 of marriage was a milestone worth celebrating, and he intended to make it unforgettable. Though their journey had been far from flawless, he believed their bond had grown stronger through every trial. By mid-afternoon, the house gleamed, the dining table was adorned with their finest china, and the air was rich with the savory aroma of rosemary and garlic from the lamb roasting in the oven. A bottle of vintage wine, saved for a moment like this, stood ready on the table beside two elegant candles. Satisfied with his efforts, Rick took a step back to admire the scene, adjusting the silverware for good measure just as the rhythmic sound of Sandra's heels echoed through the hallway. "Oh my," she said, her voice warm with surprise as she entered the room. "You've really outdone yourself." Rick turned, his smile widening as his gaze met hers. "Only the best for you," he said, his tone sincere. She looked breathtaking in an emerald green dress that accentuated her figure, her lips painted a bold, striking red. As she gave a playful twirl, the hem of her dress flared gently, adding a lively touch to her entrance. "This is truly impressive," she remarked, her eyes sweeping over the table. "You've gone all out." With a theatrical flourish, he pulled out her chair and gestured for her to sit. "After 22 years, you've earned it," he said with a chuckle. Settling into the chair, she let out a soft laugh. "You're making it hard for other husbands to compete," she teased. Rick took his seat across from her and poured 2 glasses of wine. Lifting his glass, he met her gaze with genuine affection. "To us," he toasted. "To us," she echoed, her smile momentarily faltering as she took a sip. They began their meal, and Rick launched into an enthusiastic recounting of his latest project, a groundbreaking skyscraper he was designing that promised to redefine the city's skyline. Sandra nodded along, but her focus seemed elsewhere, her gaze flitting occasionally toward the clock on the wall. "You're distracted," Rick teased, catching her inattentiveness. Not exactly the reaction I'd hoped for. She blinked, her attention snapping back to him. "What? No, I'm listening," she said hurriedly. "The skyscraper sounds incredible." He tilted his head, studying her. "You sure you're okay? You seem preoccupied." Waving her hand dismissively, she offered a quick smile. "I'm fine, just thinking about tonight. I have a little something planned, too." His curiosity piqued. "Something planned? What kind of something?" Her lips curved into a coy smile as she sipped her wine. "It's a surprise." He laughed, shaking his head. "You and surprises. You can't keep them secret for long." "This time I can," she said confidently, her tone light but self-assured. Rick's grin wavered as he noticed an unusual edge to her demeanor. "All right," he said cautiously. "You've got me curious. Give me a hint?" "Not a chance," she replied with a chuckle. "You'll find out soon enough." The dinner continued smoothly on the surface. The lamb was tender and flavorful, and the wine, a favorite of theirs, added a celebratory touch. Rick spoke with excitement about his project, detailing its innovative design and ambitious scope. Sandra offered polite affirmations, but her attention kept straying to the clock. By the 3rd time, Rick couldn't ignore it. "You keep checking the time," he said lightly, setting his fork down. "Am I losing you?" Her head snapped back to him, her smile quick but tight. "What? No, of course not, I just—" She hesitated, biting her lip in a way that had once charmed him but now felt deliberate. "I've been thinking about my surprise." "Another surprise?" he asked, intrigued but uneasy. "You know I'm not good with suspense." She laughed softly, swirling her wine. "Trust me," she said, her voice teasing. "You'll like it." "Should I be worried?" he joked. though a flicker of anxiety edged his tone. Her smirk widened as she leaned back in her chair. Just be patient. You'll see. By the time dessert arrived, a decadent chocolate mousse from a local patisserie, the mood had shifted. They ate mostly in silence, the air taut with an unspoken tension. Rick found himself stealing glances at Sandra, trying to decipher the enigmatic glint in her eyes, which seemed playful yet oddly calculating. Setting her fork down, Sandra broke the silence. "I have something to tell you," she said, her tone deliberate and measured. Rick set his glass down, a mixture of curiosity and unease tightening in his chest. "Something to tell me?" She nodded, leaning forward. "I've been thinking about us, about our relationship, and I thought of a way we could make things more exciting." Her words hung in the air and Rick frowned slightly. "Exciting? What kind of exciting?" Her smile turned sly, a spark of mischief lighting her expression. "I invited someone to join us tonight." The statement landed like a thunderclap. Rick froze, struggling to process her words. "What?" he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Sandra's head tilted, her tone turning almost playful. "I thought it might be fun, a way to see a different side of me, to feel how much you desire me." His fork slipped from his hand, clattering against his plate with a sharp sound. He stared at her, a storm of disbelief and anger surging through him. "Sandra," he began, but the words faltered as a flood of emotions threatened to drown him. "Are you kidding me?" Rick's voice cut through the room, disbelief etched into every syllable. Sandra responded with a lazy shrug, a mischievous sparkle in her eyes as she casually reached for her wineglass. "Oh, please, Rick," she said with an air of mockery. "What happened to that unshakable confidence you're always flaunting? Don't tell me a little rivalry has you this worked up." Her words landed like a jab, and his face flushed with indignation. "You always say you thrive under pressure," she continued, her tone teasing and sharp. "Are you afraid someone might actually outshine you this time?" Rick's chest tightened as anger surged through him, his fists clenching beneath the table. He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto hers with a fiery intensity. "The moment that idiot walks into my house, I'll make sure he regrets it," he snarled, his voice low and laced with venom. "And I'll make it clear you're both unwelcome here." Sandra laughed, a sound sharp and mocking, slicing through the tension like a blade. "Oh, relax," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "You're so predictable, it's almost boring." His jaw tightened as her words hit their mark. "Predictable?" she pressed, her voice filled with feigned innocence. "I thought you prided yourself on being adaptable. Guess I was wrong." Rick stared at her, his emotions swirling into a chaotic storm. His chest ached with a mix of betrayal and fury as he absorbed the icy indifference in her smirk. This was Sandra, the woman he'd once thought he knew better than anyone else, now a stranger with eyes full of cold amusement. Words failed him, his silence amplifying the tension. A sudden chime broke through the stillness. The doorbell rang, jolting Rick from his storm of thoughts. His head snapped toward the door, suspicion darkening his features. "What's this about, Sandra?" he asked, his voice low and foreboding. She rose with unsettling grace, smoothing the fabric of her dress as though she hadn't just thrown gasoline onto an already blazing fire. "You'll see," she said lightly, her tone infuriatingly calm. "Sandra," he growled, his voice rising with urgency, "don't play games with me." She didn't answer, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she moved toward the entryway. Rick pushed back his chair, standing abruptly as dread coiled in his stomach like a serpent. His pulse quickened as he followed her, each step heavy with unease. She opened the door with a serene smile, revealing a man whose presence set Rick's nerves on edge. The stranger was tall, his lean, muscular frame filling the doorway. His fitted black t-shirt clung to his broad chest, and his confident smirk was laced with arrogance. Everything about him, from his swagger to the gleam in his eyes, spoke of trouble. "Rick," Sandra said, her voice a honeyed blend of charm and something far more sinister. "Meet Justin." Justin stepped inside without hesitation, surveying the home as though he were appraising a new acquisition. He let out a low whistle, his smirk widening. "Nice place," he said with a hint of mockery. "I guess playing it safe pays off in the end." Rick's fists clenched at his sides as his temper flared. The insult wasn't subtle, and the way Justin's gaze lingered on Sandra before returning to him only added fuel to the fire. Justin leaned against the doorframe, his smirk now a full-blown grin. "Hope you don't mind me borrowing your wife tonight," he said, his voice dripping with audacity. The room seemed to freeze for a moment, as the brazen comment hung in the air. Rick's pulse roared in his ears, but Sandra's light laugh broke the tension. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, her demeanor breezy, but not entirely convincing. "Justin, don't!" she said, her voice carrying a faint tremor beneath the nonchalance. "Rick's just processing." Rick's piercing gaze locked onto Justin. "Justin, right?" he said, his voice cool and calculated. "Why don't you take a seat? We should talk." Justin raised an eyebrow, clearly unfazed. "Sure," he replied with a shrug, striding into the living room and sprawling on the couch as if he owned it. Sandra lingered in the doorway, her earlier confidence wavering slightly. "Don't make this awkward, Rick," she said, her tone now edged with warning. "Awkward?" Rick echoed, his voice eerily calm. "I'll keep it civil." He turned on his heel and headed to the kitchen, his mind racing. Gripping the edge of the counter, Rick fought to steady his breathing. His knuckles turned white as the fury and sense of betrayal coursed through him. His eyes fell on the open drawer nearby, the gleam of a knife catching the light. A dark thought flickered in his mind, but he shoved it aside. He wouldn't lose control. Not like this. Instead, he reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number for his lawyer. He stared at it briefly before returning to the edge of the living room, his phone held at an angle to discreetly capture the scene. Justin was lounging, a glass of wine in hand, his laughter cutting through the room as he said something Rick couldn't hear. The way Sandra leaned toward him sent a fresh wave of anger through Rick. When he re-entered the living room, his expression was composed, but there was something unnerving in his calm. "So, Justin," Rick began, settling into an armchair across from him, "what do you do?" Justin's smirk widened. "I'm a personal trainer," he said, leaning back with a cocky air. "Keeps me in shape, not that I need much help with my genetics." "Interesting," Rick replied, his tone flat. "Does it pay well?" Justin shrugged, clearly unconcerned. "It's not about the money," he said dismissively. "It's about living in the moment, taking what you want." Rick's gaze shifted to Sandra, who now seemed uneasy. "And how exactly did you meet my wife?" Justin hesitated briefly, then grinned. "At her gym," he said smoothly. "Things just clicked." Sandra shifted in her seat, her confidence cracking. "Rick, let's not—" "No," Rick interrupted, his smile tight. "Let him finish." Justin leaned back, completely at ease. "She told me you were cool with it, that you liked keeping things interesting." Rick let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp and unnerving. "She told you that?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Sandra's face betrayed a flicker of surprise, though she remained silent as Rick spoke first. "Not now, Sandra. Let him finish," he said, his voice low but carrying a sharper edge than before. Justin glanced between them, oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the rising tension. His arrogance remained unshaken as he smirked. "Chill out, man. I'm not here to cause trouble. If this isn't my scene, I'll bounce, but—" He let his gaze linger on Sandra, a smug grin playing on his lips. She seemed pretty into the idea of me sticking around. Rick's laugh was devoid of humor. "Oh, I'm sure she did." The air grew heavier, the palpable weight of Rick's simmering anger pressing down on the room. Sandra shifted uneasily, her confidence faltering under the force of his unyielding stare. Leaning forward, Rick rested his elbows on his knees, his voice cutting through the silence. "Tell me something, Justin. Do you make it a habit to walk into other men's homes and show them disrespect?" Justin's smirk twitched, his bravado flickering. "Look, I'm just here because she asked me to be. If you've got an issue, maybe you should take it up with her." Rick stood abruptly, his movements sharp and controlled. Oh, I intend to. But first, let me grab something. When he returned, he held a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. His expression was calm, almost disarming, though an undercurrent of intensity still lingered. Figured we should do this right, he said, his smile faint but inscrutable. He poured generously for Justin and then for himself. Justin leaned back, appearing to settle in. What are we celebrating? He asked, raising an eyebrow. New beginnings, Rick replied evenly. Sandra laughed nervously, clinking her glass against Justin's. That's the spirit, she said, her voice strained. I knew you'd come around, Rick. Rick raised his glass, holding Justin's gaze with unnerving steadiness. Cheers, he said, barely wetting his lips with the drink. Justin, however, downed his glass in one swift motion, grinning all the while. Sandra followed, though her darting glances at Rick betrayed her unease. So, Justin, Rick began conversationally, settling into a chair opposite him. You're a personal trainer, right? Justin's confidence surged as he nodded. Yeah, that's right. Got a pretty solid client base, mostly women. He chuckled, casting a knowing look at Sandra. They seem to really appreciate what I bring to the table. Rick chuckled lightly. I'll bet they do. Sounds like you've got a knack for it. Justin's grin widened. What can I say? I've got the full package. Looks, charm, talent. Women can't get enough. Rick swirled the whiskey in his glass, his tone deliberately casual. Must be nice to be selective about your clients. I'm guessing not everyone can afford your services? Justin laughed. Exactly. I don't waste my time on just anyone, but Sandra, she's different. Rick's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, though his expression remained composed. Different, he echoed flatly. Sandra shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable under the charged atmosphere. Rick, let's not make this so serious, Sandra said, forcing a light laugh. We're just here to relax. Of course, Rick replied smoothly, his voice devoid of any discernible emotion. He glanced at Justin, who had already begun pouring himself another drink. How about I grab some snacks? Make yourselves comfortable. He disappeared into the kitchen without waiting for a response. Once out of sight, he pulled out his phone and typed quickly. His messages were brief but decisive. To his lawyer, I want the divorce papers ready by morning. Freeze all joint accounts immediately. The reply came swiftly. Understood. Confirming now. To his private investigator, send me the files tonight. All of them. The investigator responded within moments. Delivered. Everything's ready. Slipping his phone back into his pocket, Rick allowed himself a cold, fleeting smile. The final pieces of his plan were falling into place. He returned to the living room with a bowl of mixed nuts, setting it down on the table with casual ease. Here we go, he said, sitting down. Justin grabbed a handful without hesitation. Thanks, man. See? You're not so bad after all. Rick's smile was unreadable. I try. Over the next hour, Rick kept the conversation flowing effortlessly, masking his disdain behind polite small talk. Justin, completely oblivious, grew more relaxed with each passing minute. Sandra, however, grew increasingly tense, her discomfort evident in the furtive glances she cast in Rick's direction. Eventually, Rick stood, stretching casually. Excuse me for a moment, he said, heading toward his study. Once inside, he locked the door and sat at his desk. Pulling up the hidden camera footage he'd been collecting for weeks, he forced himself to watch every clip. Each scene confirmed his suspicions, exposing Sandra and Justin's betrayal in unforgiving detail. On the couch, in the kitchen, even in the bedroom he had once shared with her. Though the sight made his stomach churn, Rick refused to look away. He needed the pain, the anger, to solidify his resolve. He downloaded the files and sent them to his lawyer and investigator with a final message. This is the proof. Make sure it reaches the right hands. The investigator replied almost immediately, Delivered. Everything is secure. Taking a steadying breath, Rick returned to the living room. Justin was sprawled across the couch, entirely at ease, while Sandra perched nervously on the edge of her seat. You were gone a while, Sandra said with a strained laugh. Just handling some work, Rick replied smoothly. You know how it is. Justin snorted. Man, you need to loosen up. You're way too uptight. Rick's faint smile didn't reach his eyes. You're probably right, he said evenly. But I think it's time to call it a night. Sandra's eyes darted around the room, confusion flickering across her face. What had just transpired? She opened her mouth to question, but Rick's voice cut through the air, sharp and unyielding. Justin needs to leave. Now! Justin raised an eyebrow, his casual demeanor betraying his surprise at the sudden shift. What's the rush? He asked, leaning back with a cocky grin. We were just getting started. Rick crossed his arms, the calm he usually wore like armor cracking just enough to reveal the determination underneath. I've been more than patient, but my patience has run out. Get out. With a slow, exaggerated movement, Justin pushed himself out of the chair. All right. No need to get dramatic, he said with a chuckle. His gaze flicked to Sandra, and his swagger returned. See you later, sweetheart. Rick's fists clenched at his sides, but he stayed planted in place, his eyes following Justin as he sauntered toward the door. Just as Justin reached the threshold, Rick set his phone on the table with a deliberate motion. His voice, low and icy, sliced through the air. Hold on, Justin. Sandra. Let's drop the act. Sandra's head tilted, her voice shaking as she attempted to feign innocence. What are you talking about, Rick? His smile was devoid of warmth. You wanted to surprise me, didn't you? Well, here's a surprise of my own. With meticulous precision, he tapped his phone and turned the screen toward them. A video played in crystal clear quality, showing Sandra and Justin entwined on their bed. The timestamp made the betrayal irrefutable. It had happened only days ago. Sandra's face went ashen. Rick, I can explain. Don't, he interrupted, his tone cutting like a blade. Don't insult me with excuses. Justin leaned forward, his confidence wavering but still intact. Hey man, let's not make this a big deal. These things happen. No need to blow it out of proportion. Rick let out a cold, humorless laugh. These things happen? Not in my house, not with my wife. But don't worry, Justin. You'll be dealing with the fallout soon enough. Sandra's voice broke as she tried to regain control. Rick, please, let's talk about this privately. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. He silenced her with a raised hand. You forfeited the right to fix anything when you chose to betray me. You had every opportunity to be honest, to preserve what we had. Instead, you destroyed it. Justin straightened, attempting to salvage his arrogance. So, what now? You caught us. Big deal. What are you going to do, cry? Rick's smile turned lethal. Cry? No. I'm going to dismantle both of you. Justin's smirk faltered. What are you talking about? Rick retrieved his phone again, scrolling through documents before sliding it across the table to Sandra. First, the house. You've enjoyed living here, haven't you? Well, it's in my name. You'll be packing your things tonight. Sandra's eyes widened in disbelief. You can't be serious. Ignoring her, he turned to Justin. Second, the finances. Sandra, your reckless spending ends now. I froze all our joint accounts this afternoon. Her voice cracked as tears welled in her eyes. Rick, please, don't do this. He met her gaze, his words relentless. We were married for 22 years. You threw it all away. Then, his focus shifted to Justin. And you? Don't think you're getting off easy. Justin stiffened, his facade of indifference slipping. What do you mean? Rick leaned in, his voice a quiet menace. You run a gym chain, don't you? Or at least you did. Turns out I'm the majority shareholder. As of tonight, your contracts are void, your membership's canceled, and your staff informed about your extracurricular activities. Justin's expression darkened. You're bluffing. Rick raised an eyebrow, scrolling through his phone again. Here's the email I sent to the board of directors. Confirm it tomorrow if you'd like. Justin shot to his feet, his anger boiling over. You think you can ruin me and get away with it? Rick stood as well, his composed demeanor more intimidating than any outburst. Ruin you? I'm just getting started. Sandra's sobs grew louder as she reached for his arm. Please, Rick. I made a mistake. I'll do anything to fix this. He glanced at her hand on his arm as though it were a foreign object. A mistake? You call months of lies and betrayal a mistake? Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of everything we've built. Instead, you turned it into a farce. Sandra collapsed to the floor, her tears flowing freely. Please, Rick, don't end it like this. His expression was unyielding. You ended it the moment you brought him into our lives. The moment you decided I wasn't enough. Justin crossed his arms, attempting to regain some dignity. You're not the first guy to get cheated on. Move on. Rick turned to him, his voice venomous. You're lucky I'm not handling this with my fists, but trust me, the consequences will hit you where it hurts most. Justin's bravado crumbled entirely. He grabbed his jacket and stormed toward the door, muttering, You're insane. The door slammed shut behind him. As the sound of Justin's car faded, Rick turned to Sandra, who remained trembling on the floor. Get up, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. She rose slowly, her tear-streaked face a portrait of anguish, but his hardened expression left no room for hope. There was no way back from this. Her mascara ran in jagged streaks down her face, smudged and chaotic, like rain carving tracks on a dusty window pane. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered, her voice quivering as if the weight of the words might crush her. Rick's reply came like the bite of frost. That's not my problem. You made your bed, now lie in it. But not here. You're leaving tonight. Desperation flared in Sandra's eyes as she grasped at the fraying edges of hope. Rick, please, she begged, her voice splintering. We've been through so much. Don't let it end like this. His gaze lingered on her, memories flashing behind his eyes like a dying film reel. For a moment, the storm of anger threatening to engulf him ebbed, replaced by the faint sting of sorrow. But it was fleeting, smothered almost instantly by the avalanche of betrayal. You ended it, Sandra, he said, each word sharp and deliberate. Not me. As she staggered toward the stairs to gather her things, Rick sank into his chair, exhaustion and anger coiled tightly in his chest. His hand found the glass of whiskey he'd left earlier. The amber liquid caught the light, swirling like the chaos in his mind. He had loved her once, deeply. Yet as the echo of the slamming door filled the house, relief seeped into his being. This wasn't just an ending. It was the promise of a new beginning, a chance to rebuild without the weight of lies dragging him down. The house was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your skin. Sandra crumpled in the entryway, her knees buckling as tears cascaded down her face. Her sobs were raw and unrestrained, filling the empty space like a mournful hymn. Rick stood frozen by the dining table, his jaw clenched tight, staring into the distance as though he could see a future beyond the wreckage of their past. Rick, please, she rasped through her sobs, her voice barely audible. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I was so stupid, but I love you. I've always loved you. His head turned slowly, his expression colder than a winter wind. Love? He repeated, the word dripping with venom. Is that what you call it? Sneaking around with another man? Destroying everything we built together? That's your idea of love? Sandra crawled forward on her knees, grasping at his shirt like a drowning person reaching for a lifeline. It was a mistake, she choked out. I wasn't thinking. I thought it would fix something. Please, Rick, don't let this destroy us. Rick recoiled, yanking his shirt from her grip as though her touch scorched him. Fix something? He barked, incredulous. You thought cheating would fix us? You didn't just betray me, Sandra. You obliterated every ounce of trust I had in you. And now you want me to just forget it because you're sorry? Her sobs intensified, her voice cracking under the weight of her desperation. I'll do anything, she pleaded. Anything to make it right. Tell me what you want. I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you. A bitter laugh escaped Rick's lips, cutting through her cries like a blade. This isn't about what I want, he said, his tone icy. What I wanted was a wife I could trust, someone who respected me, someone who wouldn't destroy my life behind my back. But you took all of that and crushed it. Now you expect me to pretend none of it happened? She reached for him again, clutching at his arm, but he wrenched it away, his voice rising in anger. Don't you dare tell me what you'll do for me! Do you think I needed to find out like this? To see you with him, here, In our home, to hear you call me a loser behind my back? You don't get to make this about you, Sandra. Her vision blurred with tears as she tried to meet his gaze. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she stammered. I felt invisible. I thought it might help us in some twisted way. I thought... His laugh was bitter, his disbelief palpable. Help us? He said, his voice trembling with restrained fury. You thought sleeping with someone else would help us? Sandra, you're not just selfish. You're delusional. She reached for him again, her hands trembling, but he stepped back deliberately, creating a chasm between them. Rick, we can fix this, she whispered. I can fix this. He shook his head, his voice quieter now, but every bit as sharp. There is no we anymore. The moment you brought him into our lives, you burned that bridge. And fixing this, that's not your call. It's mine, and I've made it. Her sobs turned to gasping breaths as she fought to stand, her legs barely holding her weight. You're not perfect either, she said, her voice feeble but accusatory. You've made mistakes. You've buried yourself in work, ignored me, made me feel like I didn't exist. Rick's expression hardened further. So that's your excuse? He shot back. I worked myself to the bone to give you a good life, a home, stability, everything you could ever need. And instead of talking to me, you destroyed it all behind my back. If you felt invisible, it's because you were hiding in the shadows with him. Her lip quivered as shame painted her face. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. For a moment his eyes softened, but the flicker of tenderness was extinguished as quickly as it appeared. You lost me the moment you made that choice, he said, his tone final. What we had is gone. You killed it. Sandra staggered back, barely managing to keep herself upright. So what happens now? She asked, her voice hollow. You're just throwing me out like I'm nothing? Rick crossed his arms, his stance unyielding. You're leaving tonight, he said firmly. Her eyes widened, disbelief etched into her features. Leave? Where am I supposed to go? This is my home too. He shook his head, his voice resolute. No, Sandra. This is my home. The deed's in my name. After tonight, so is everything else. You forfeited your place here the second you chose to betray me. Her gaze darted around the room, searching desperately for something to anchor herself. You can't do this, she whispered. Rick's eyes remained steely, his voice calm, but unrelenting. You did this to yourself, he said quietly. And with those words, the fragile remnants of their life together shattered completely. Sandra sat motionless, her hands trembling as the weight of her words settled in the air. I have nowhere else to turn, she said, her voice strained with desperation. Rick's reply came like a cold wind, sharp and unsympathetic. That's not my problem anymore, he stated, his tone cutting. You should have thought about this before you threw away everything we built together. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, her shoulders heaving as if under the crushing load of his response. You're doing this to hurt me, she sobbed, her voice trembling. You want to see me destroyed. Rick's face remained unmoved. No, Sandra. You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure you face the consequences. Her cries filled the room, echoing her despair, but he remained steadfast. Turning away, he walked slowly toward the staircase, each step deliberate. Rick, Sandra called after him, her voice raw and breaking. Don't abandon me like this. I love you. Please. He paused briefly at the foot of the stairs, his back still to her. For a moment his posture shifted as if her words had reached some part of him. But when he finally spoke, his voice was devoid of warmth. If you really loved me, you wouldn't have done what you did. Without another word, he ascended the stairs, leaving Sandra alone in the empty dining room, her sobs reverberating through the stillness. Months later, the house that once bore the weight of betrayal had undergone a transformation. The dining room, previously a battleground of emotions, now radiated warmth and life. A soft light from the chandelier bathed a table set for two, where Rick sat across from Lucy, a woman whose cheerful laughter had become a soothing presence in his life. So, Mr. Master Architect, Lucy teased, pointing her fork at him with playful accusation, are all your dinners this fancy, or am I just special? Rick chuckled, swirling the wine in his glass. Only for the truly exceptional, he said with a wink. I've got to make an impression after all. Her grin widened. Well, consider me impressed, she replied, her eyes sparkling. For the first time in years, Rick felt a genuine joy stir within him, something he had thought lost. He leaned back, watching as Lucy animatedly shared a story about her time volunteering at an animal shelter. Her energy was infectious, her presence grounding yet light. She paused, studying him thoughtfully. You seem different from when we met at the gala. Happier, lighter, like you've come through something difficult and grown because of it. Rick nodded slowly, her words resonating deeply. I think you're right, he said. The past year was challenging, to say the least. But sometimes the hardest lessons teach you what matters most. Her curiosity was evident. And what matters to you now? He hesitated, reflecting on the question. Trust, he finally said. Respect, building something meaningful with someone who values the same. I spent too long pretending the cracks in my life didn't exist. Now I want something real. Lucy reached out, her hand brushing his. You deserve that, Rick, and you'll find it. Their eyes met, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Rick experienced a profound sense of peace. Across the city, Sandra sat in a cramped, dimly lit apartment that mirrored her own disheveled state. The confident, polished woman she once was had been replaced by someone tired and defeated. Bills in haphazard piles littered her coffee table, and the flickering television cast erratic shadows on the walls. A cheap bottle of wine rested in her trembling hands as she took another sip. Her phone vibrated on the couch beside her, the screen lighting up with another call from a debt collector. She glanced at it with a weary sigh and silenced the ringer. Closing her eyes, she felt the tightness in her chest grow, the consequences of her actions weighing heavier with each passing moment. Rick had kept his word. He had revealed her betrayal, sending incriminating evidence to her employer. The fallout had been swift and unforgiving, leaving her jobless and ostracized. Her once secure financial standing had crumbled to dust. Justin, the man who had enticed her into the web of deceit, had vanished without a trace. His promises and charm had dissipated the moment Rick severed ties. Sandra hadn't heard from him in months, leaving her in the deafening silence of her solitude. Her eyes fell on a photograph of her and Rick from better times, the only keepsake she had taken from their former home. Tears blurred her vision as she ran a finger over his face in the picture. I'm so sorry, she whispered into the empty room. I ruined everything. Back at Rick's home, Lucy stood by the fireplace, admiring framed sketches of his architectural work. These are incredible, she said, glancing back at him. Do you ever stop creating things? Rick laughed, joining her by the mantel. Only when someone distracts me enough to forget about work, he replied. Lucy turned to face him, her expression soft. You're good at this, moving forward. A lot of people would let bitterness take over after everything you've been through. He exhaled deeply, his gaze falling briefly. I won't lie. Bitterness was tempting. For a while, I let it take hold. But I realized anger wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't undo the past or make me feel better. The best way to move on wasn't revenge. It was rebuilding my life. Lucy stepped closer, her smile warm. And you've done that. Not by myself, he said, his eyes meeting hers. I've had help. The silence between them felt full of unspoken understanding. Lucy broke the moment with a playful laugh. All right, enough heavy conversation. Do you have dessert? Or do I need to search your kitchen? Rick grinned. Stay here. I'll grab it. As he headed to the kitchen, Lucy wandered back to the dining table, her fingers lightly grazing the tablecloth. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something significant, unexpected, yet deeply promising. When Rick returned with a plate of tiramisu, he noticed her holding a silver-framed photo from the mantel. Who's this? She asked, showing him the image of a younger Rick with a bright-eyed girl. His expression softened. That's Scarlett, he said. My daughter. She's in college now. Smart, maybe too smart. She saw the cracks in my life long before I did. Lucy carefully placed the frame back. You must be so proud of her. I am, he said, nodding. She's one of the reasons I stayed strong. I wanted to show her that no matter how broken things seem, you can always rebuild. Lucy's smile deepened, and the two returned to the table. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, punctuated with laughter as they traded stories of clumsy first encounters and hilariously disastrous dates. For the first time in a long while, Rick felt like he was stepping into a future filled with hope and honesty. As the night stretched into its quietest hours, Rick was struck by an unexpected truth. The weight of his past no longer anchored him. The betrayals, the smoldering resentment, and the persistent ache were still faint whispers in his mind, but they no longer held dominion over him. For the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of freedom settle in his chest. Elsewhere, Sandra spent her evenings immersed in the pale glow of her phone screen, flipping through faded photographs that seemed to mock her with memories of what she had allowed to slip through her fingers. Her thumb hesitated over a snapshot from their 15th anniversary, a candid moment of Rick caught mid-laughter, his arm casually resting around her shoulders with unmistakable affection. She could almost feel the way he used to look at her, as though she were his entire world. Now she was nothing more than a page turned in his story. Clutching the phone to her chest as she curled into the couch, Sandra whispered into the stillness, "If only I could take it all back." Yet, even as the words left her lips, she knew their futility. Regret could not rewrite the choices she had made, nor erase the shadow they cast over her life. Later that night, Rick walked Lucy to her car, the crisp evening air wrapping around them like a gentle embrace. "Thank you for tonight," Lucy said softly, her voice tinged with sincerity and warmth. Rick's smile was faint but genuine. "No," he replied. "Thank you." He remained in the driveway as Lucy's car disappeared into the night, the red glow of its taillights shrinking to nothingness before finally fading away. For the first time in what felt like ages, Rick felt a quiet contentment settle over him. It was more than peace. It was the certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Turning toward the house, he stepped inside and closed the door with a sense of finality. The past was a story he had finished reading, and ahead of him stretched a road filled with the promise of brighter days. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the Force be with you.